everyone. I am Matt Bateman, the VP of Pedagogy at Higher Ground Education, and I am very happy to be introducing Judith Cunningham. Judith is the founder and chief strategy officer of Montessori Model UN. She founded MMUN to help students find their voices, take action, and build peace. The program is poised for the possible by aligning the idealism and capacity of adolescents to understand global problems, to identify local problems that break their hearts, and then to take action and have an impact on the world they want. Judith is a remarkable woman. She holds an AMI elementary diploma, a master's degree in education. She's done postgraduate work in alternate dispute resolution. She's a board member of Montessori Europe and the Youth for a Better World. Her prior experience includes 17 years as a Montessori teacher for elementary and middle school, 15 years as a Montessori head of school in the US and Canada, and 16 years as a teacher trainer. So please enjoy Judith's talk.
Hello, my name is Judith Cunningham. I'm a Montessori educator and the founder of Youth for a Better World. We are a non-governmental organization, an NGO, in special consultative status with the United Nations Economic, Social, and Cultural Council. I'm excited today to join you virtually in this very important Congress on Discovering the Child. My topic today is Montessori's vision of peace and how it embraces sustainability, social justice, and solidarity. Let's begin. I'm going to share with you Dr. Montessori's story, her life story of her work, and how she supported the development of peace through the reform of society. You know that she was a social activist, speaking out against discrimination of all kinds. She was a feminist and stood up for the rights of women. She was an internationalist and said, "We are one nation." And finally, she was a peace advocate, 3 times nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. But let's begin at the beginning. Young Montessori was born at the birth of the Unification of Italy. It was a time of great optimism when there was much belief that there could be social reform for all people, but particularly for the poor. Montessori was born into this optimism, and in coming from an affluent family, she was fortunate to be able to have her ambitions supported by her family. Well, the very first barrier that Montessori broke was that to higher education for girls. Montessori was fortunate in being able to go to technical high school at a time when the conservative thinking of women was that they were to be homemakers and that the professions were closed to women, but not for Dr. Maria Montessori, who was in fact among the very first female doctors in Italy. In medical school, she was exposed to ideas by her professors about social reform, especially those that had to do with women's rights and the rights of children. The very year that Montessori graduated from medical school, 1896, she was chosen to represent Italy at an international women's congress in Berlin. She delivered an address on the rights of working women, advocating for liberty and social equality for women, especially equal pay and the right to vote. Montessori continued to speak out throughout Europe at congresses. She spoke against the miserable working conditions for women and children, specifically in factories and in mines. She stood up in opposition to child labor, and she advocated for social reform. She believed that social problems were the result of inadequate education. Montessori stood up for the right of women to vote. As early as 1906, Montessori spoke out about the importance of women to have the right to vote. She was among the leading figures in Italy in the suffragette movement, and she signed a petition that said, "Women, arise. Your first duty at this social moment is to claim the political vote." Montessori predated the right for Italian women to get the vote. It took 50 years before women were given the right to vote in Italy. The next discrimination young Montessori tackled was in the education of children with learning differences. She was a co-founder of the Orthophrenic School in Rome, where so-called impaired children were placed. These were often children who had been orphans or whose parents had emotional or psychological problems. And at that time, these young children were placed in so-called insane asylums with adults. Montessori advocated for children to not be placed into such homes, but rather that each child should meet with psychologists and educationalists who could design individualized learning prescriptions for them. Well, after the results of her study, Montessori was able to challenge this discrimination of mentally defective children. And her results were so outstanding that she was recognized for her work and was invited to open the very first Casa dei Bambini. And here, the children were from the working poor. They were children who were essentially left home alone while their parents were at work. These were children from 2 to 7 years of age. And she designed her method and this very first opportunity, which really became her laboratory. It was the place where she defined the Montessori movement as blending both scientific and social beliefs. She researched and documented the evolution of social reform through education. Montessori's work spread rapidly across Europe, and it came to the attention of Benito Mussolini and his fascist government. In the beginning, Mussolini supported Montessori's efforts and promoted her schools throughout Italy. And there were massive trainings in Italy for teachers to learn the Montessori method. But while the fascist government in Italy initially supported Montessori's work, finally Mussolini required that she accept fascist ideology and that she sign a pledge that her role was to promote Italian nationalism. Well, Montessori declined, and she was actually followed by the secret police in Italy and had to escape to Spain. It was at that point that Montessori began her travels across the world, sharing the research that she had gained through her Montessori Casa dei Bambini programs, and holding conferences in Europe, in the United States, and Ireland, in the UK. Montessori's work became very popular, and she said she was a citizen of the world. It was at this time Montessori began to develop her thoughts on education as being holistic and presenting to the child the whole earth by helping the child to grasp that everything is interrelated on this planet and that each detail holds the child's interest by reason of its relation to the parts. This interdependency of subjects is further developed in Montessori's interdependency chart. We see here the interdependency of life and the earth. We do not live in isolation, but are part of a living system where all is interdependent with others and the environment. Montessori's thoughts today are echoed by physicist and Fitz-Jeff Copra, who in a book entitled The Web of Life documents that life is an evolving network of lessons to which all living beings are connected. Montessori's principles are holistic and systems view, attuned to living in harmony with the earth. Both Capra and Montessori share a vision that recognizes humans as living beings and part of the systems of nature, comprising an integrated web on one planet. Montessori said that nature is her guide. Her works are full of references to the following laws of nature. She believed that nature is a teacher of life and could guide us in realizing our full potential. And she said that the problems we face could all be attributed to going against nature's laws. Montessori spoke eloquently when she said, "There is no description, no image in any book that is capable of reproducing the sight of real trees and all the life to be found around them in a real forest. Something emanates from those trees which speaks to the soul, something no book, no museum is capable of. The myriad of lives around the trees, the majesty, the variety are things one must hunt for and which no one can bring into the school." How often is the soul of man, especially that of a child, deprived because one does not put him in contact with nature? Well, Montessori continued this development of the interdependency of life and the earth. And in her years in India, she would go into more depth on the cosmic plan and cosmic education. And she actually created a philosophy from the science of evolution. In the timeline of life studies, Montessori promotes the idea that evolution of life as a great story, it's a fable, a moral guide that shows each of us that life on the earth is seemingly selfish, fighting for its own survival, but in reality also serves the good of the whole. Among the causes of war, Montessori saw the selfish and aggressive competitions of life, which aimed to divide and not unite, and considered men selfish and limited by their personal interests. But not for Montessori. She said that everything on earth has a cosmic task, has a contribution to make to the whole, to the well-being of the whole planet and life. And she said the unique part for humans is that we have the ability to become conscious of our cosmic task and our responsibility to work in collaborations for the environment, for the whole universe, towards creative fulfillment. And that is what she said from India, that the great task of the educator and of education is to make the child conscious of the reality and depth of unity. Above all, she said, we must make the children understand how extraordinarily moving it is that men are not united by their interests alone, but by a far deeper bond that exists at the very root of their brotherhood, to an awareness of universal solidarity. No phenomena can affect one human group without affecting all others. To put it in a better way, the interest of any group is the interest of all of us. She continued in this pilgrimage, saying that the great bell that calls men together under the one flag of humanity is the ring of life or death. Montessori broke the barrier of nationalism by standing up for internationalism, the idea that in this globalized, interdependent world, internationalism is a principle that brings us all together in accepting our global responsibility towards the challenges our Earth faces. And it's only through solidarity that can we sustain life for all. It is Montessori, the scientist and pacifist, who started her pilgrimage for peace in 1932. And in a series of lectures that are now published in her book, Education and Peace, she wrote, "If peace were to become a special discipline, it would be the most noble one of all, for the very life of humanity depends on it. And so perhaps does the question of whether our entire civilization evolves or disappears." But what did Dr. Montessori mean by peace? Well, first she had to clarify that peace is not something that evolved through politics. It is only through education. Because Montessori saw peace in a positive way, not in a negative way as the cessation of conflict or the end of violence. No, she said peace is a very positive concept. Peace is in the attitudes, the policies, and institutions and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies. So, what would Montessori have to say for us today? What challenges we are facing, such as rampant social injustice, threats to human rights, the increase in nationalism, challenges to scientific thinking, and the devastation of the environment? What would her advice be for us today? For me, Dr. Montessori would be looking at the crisis that we are facing. First, the COVID, the incredible pandemic that we have all lived through and are still living through, that may be predated by a global recession, and the looming climate crisis behind it with the threat of biodiversity. How would Montessori advise us today? I believe that she would be standing up for social justice through the sustainability and development as embraced in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that have been agreed to by the 193 member states of the UN to address these problems. Problems that on one goal, in one place, can enhance the progress on other goals in all places. The Sustainable Development Goals truly are the blueprint for peace, for social justice and sustainability. And at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals are three critical dimensions: people, prosperity, the planet, partnership, and peace. But what does sustainability really mean? It means something very simple. It means meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Let's take a look once more at Montessori's story and to see which of the Sustainable Development Goals she was already standing up for during her life. You talked about Montessori standing up for for equality of women, and certainly that's a Sustainable Development Goal number 5, gender equality. She was a social activist. She spoke out for decent work and economic conditions for women just as for men, and to reducing the inequalities among people. When she spoke up as a suffragette, she was standing up for Sustainable Development Goal number 5, gender equality. And as she opened the orthophrenic school and looked at children who were so-called mentally defective, she was standing up to reduce inequalities and to create quality education for all children that would address their emotional, psychological, as well as intellectual well-being. Sustainability Development Goals 10, 4, and 3. The very first Casa dei Bambini. Again, it stood up for the rights of the working poor, reducing inequalities, providing equal education for girls, and creating a brand new quality education that embraced, again, psychological, emotional, physical well-being, as well as cognitive. Sustainable Development Goals 10, 5, 4, and 3. Montessori challenged fascism and nationalism. She said, for peace and justice, we must work together for strong institutions. Sustainable Development Goal 16. The interdependency chart. Certainly, in looking at the climate crisis, we can see how our work in polluting and using our atmosphere as a sewage system is impacting people, planets, the animal, and the environment. And in her work with nature, her care of the environment, Montessori is speaking out on behalf of the Sustainable Development Goals for life on land, life below the water, and climate action. Sustainable Development Goals 15, 14, and 13. In her ability to take the science of evolution and turn it into a philosophy, she's allowing students to see this interdependency of life and the importance of climate action. Sustainable Development Goal 13. Recognizing that each of us has a cosmic task, a role to play in the fulfillment of our planet. She was speaking out on partnerships for the goals. Sustainable Development Goal 17. When Montessori said that preventing conflict is a work of politics, but education of peace comes through Sustainability Development Goal 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Really, the goal of Montessori education is creating this sustainability, as you can see in the overlap in this kind of Venn diagram. When social programs, environmental programs, and economic that support education and development come together, there is sustainability. And we can only do this in partnership and the outcome of peace. And so, what would her words be for us today? We shall walk together on this path of life, for all things are part of the universe and are connected with each other to form one whole unity. And what then could be more significant than the future of our world? And what is our responsibility? In the next few years, we will decide what our world will be like. Whether we'll succumb to climate crisis, whether we'll rip ourselves apart with divisiveness and fear of one another, or will we find ourselves in each other and build institutions where we all matter and create a world for all of us? This is our work as educators, our work with this generation in our classrooms. We know, and our students know, that there is a lot of brokenness. But in fact, there is a great, incredible opportunity to serve, to be useful, to find our cosmic task. As the Great humanitarian Pope Francis has said, "Let us come together and let us dare to dream together for the world that we want." What kind of world could we recreate with our amazing consciousness? Let me ask you, what world do you want in 2030? Well, let me share with you the vision of students who came together at a Montessori Model United Nations online conference and created this original song that embraces sustainability, social justice, and solidarity for peace. Let's hear it from the students.
Let go of prejudices tearing us apart. Be the flame burning in every heart. What we do now changes the future. We've got to remember we are one. And I guess the city ain't too pretty now that things are so insane, but I hope you can use your brain. I must confess that I can feel lonely, but I know I'm not alone, 'cause you're right here with me. You just gotta believe me. You're no longer on your own. Don't feel under the weather. We're all in this together. Is what I'm doing right or wrong? Not everyone seems to follow along. Thought all we wanted was happiness. People seem to be more interested in their own needs. Maybe we can work this out. And I guess the city ain't too pretty now that things are so insane, but I hope you can use your brain. I must confess that I can feel lonely, but I know I'm not alone, 'cause you're right here with me. You just gotta believe me. You're no longer on your own. Don't feel under the weather. We're all in this together. The city ain't too pretty now that things are so insane, but I hope you can use your brain. I must confess, I miss this so committee. There's no point in feeling blue together. There is nothing we can do. Me and you and me and you.
Ayy, we're internationally digital, collabing with the brightest colors you could ever vividly imagine. Fueled by passion, watch us take action. Flying high like we got a ride from Aladdin. So long, this is not a slow song. This a Mario mushroom to make you grow strong. Cliff hanging by one hand, but still I hold on. Sometimes I feel like the hope's gone,
but I know I'm not alone. 'Cause you're right here with me. You just gotta believe me. You're no longer on your own. Don't feel under the weather. We're all in this together.
always together. We're always together, baby.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Judith. How are you?
Great. How are you, Matt?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for that wonderful presentation and that really inspiring student song.
Yes, they always inspire me.
I'll be taking questions via Hopin. So if you guys want to ask, who are listening, want to ask questions via either the Q&A panel or the chat, I'll be monitoring it and filtering them to Judith. But I can just start as well. So I have a million questions from the wonderful presentation. One of the things that Montessori was worried about, and even in some of the works that you were quoting from her San Remo lectures and her lectures that were reprinted in Child Society and the World, is this idea that children need to fall in love with humanity and the world and nature and not become cynical about it. And this is something that I've come to really notice this in the last couple of years amongst teenagers that I know, is that they often feel this, when they think of the future,
Yes.
They feel this tremendous anxiety and tremendous guilt. That they feel like, I mean, the message that they're getting is like, everything is falling apart, like
Yes.
everything is terrible. And it seems like just the song that you just played and just the message that you were describing from Maria Montessori seems very different from that. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that kind of, that
Absolutely.
contrast and that vision. Yeah, go ahead.
And you know, this anxiety that you're talking about for young adults, students, really has a name, particularly for the climate crisis. It's called ecophobia, and it is a fear that's based on a sense of being unable to do anything. What we do know from research is that when students understand they have a sense of efficacy, that they can do something, and there's support to have them engage in ways of empowerment, to take action, this kind of paralysis goes away. So Montessori's message, I think, was always about empowering young people to initially to be independent, as 0 to 3, and then during the elementary years to become interdependent, to see how they're involved with one another, and then of course with the community experience of the adolescent, to see how we are truly interdependent, and that by working together we can achieve something. That something as big as climate change can be overwhelming, but when students are given the opportunity to see that they can make changes that collectively are part of a movement to create bigger change. And I think that's one of the important messages of the SDGs. They're universal, they're for everyone, for all countries, all governments, and private individuals, NGOs, for-profit institutions, world governments working together. We can make a difference. We've already shown that with the first set of global goals, the Millennium Development Goals. And so by students understanding that their actions, while by themselves may feel small, that they're really part of a movement to create a better world.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we're getting some questions about your work with the Montessori Model UN. So maybe you can indulge us and just give us an opportunity to share more about that work and its role in achieving this vision that you're describing.
Sure. So I guess, the story about Montessori Model United Nations was that at a serendipitous social event, I met a UN ambassador, and he asked me if there was a Montessori Model UN program, and I told him no, I didn't think there was. And so he invited us to start it, and it was the anniversary year of Montessori's first children's house. So why am I telling you this? It's because Montessori was a member of UNESCO, and she told UNESCO that they needed to listen to children if they really wanted to find innovative solutions to world problems. And I believe that as an educator, having worked with elementary students and middle school students, I could attest to their incredibly creative ideas. But there was no forum that I knew about where students would actually have an opportunity to share their ideas. But first, they needed to create an awareness of global problems, because many students are not aware. And from that awareness, then to gain an understanding of what's causing those problems. Why do they exist? When students have a sense of understanding and awareness, they often feel a sense of responsibility, that they can do something and they want to make a contribution to take action. It's kind of a natural developmental process of civic engagement. And so Montessori Model UN was designed to create this opportunity for awareness and understanding of global problems by taking on the role of an ambassador of a country other than their own and engaging in a conference where they meet students from all over the world, and they need to defend the position of the country that they're representing on an important global topic on the UN agenda. It could be climate change, it could be child labor, it could be child soldiers, anything that's on the UN agenda. And in doing that, students have to understand a country from the inside out. Why do they have this position? How it's in the interest of the country, and then how to listen to other positions so that they can find common ground and create a solution that's based on consensus, which is what the UN resolutions are primarily based on, 85% of them today. So, you know, the idea of MMUN is really about engaging students as agents of change, but doing that parallel to their development. So we start with students as young as 9 years of age, because this is the initiation of the social justice, sensitivity social justice. And by taking on this role of an ambassador of another country, they develop empathy from different perspectives, which is really the foundation for creating solutions.
Yeah, so I mean, this relates to another question that we just got, which is about the ages of the MMUN. So, I mean, the question is, how beneficial do you think these conferences are, the MMUN conferences are for primary elementary school age children? And it sounds like what you're saying is that the kind of sensitive period, in a sense,
Exactly.
starts in the middle of elementary. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And, you know, while I, of course, believe in this program, and I believe in it because I've seen the impact it has on students. And what I would say, you know, if you go to our website, montessori-mun.org, and you'll see videos of students speaking, not me speaking, but students telling the world about the impact and how they want to solve problems and create a better world.
Yeah. We have a question from Monica. Hi, Monica. Do you see differences in terms of perceptions on various continents, how children and their families evaluate phenomena like the pandemic, climate change, et cetera, as calls for action? And maybe I could just add to that a little bit. We what's the right way to put this? We, at least in the US,
Yes.
we live in a very politically polarized time when, I mean, there are people who don't accept, many people who don't accept the kind of severity of these issues, or who disagree about how to talk to them. Like, it's not like there's kind of common ground on what the issues are, and we can come together to figure it out and kind of meet our differences. The differences are quite deep. And those, I mean, when the differences are kind of quite deep and that widespread, those
Yes.
penetrate into like different subcultures and different families. And I'm just wondering how you think about how do you, like, what are the differences that you see, and how do you work to find common ground?
Well, that's really an interesting question, because there are many layers to it. So our work is primarily with teachers. So we provide a teacher workshop so teachers know how to prepare their students, how to research a global issue, how to become an ambassador, how to negotiate and follow the UN rules of procedure. So teachers are already self-selecting, those that decide to join the program. But certainly, even with schools and teachers selecting to be part of it, there are always students who probably start out in the program with questions because of the values or information from their family or culture. What we find is that when students have a chance to research and understand, and then at a conference to come together and to meet students from all over the world, those stereotypes, those misinformations seem to dissolve, because I'm face to face now with a human being from that country, for which my country seems to have a deep political difference. So there's a kind of friendship that develops that surpasses politics. And I've seen this happen over and over again. One of my most powerful memories was we did a conference in Geneva, and at that conference there were Palestinian students who were well integrated into the conference, and they had difficulty coming because their parents knew that Israel was going to be represented. But after a lot of hand-holding, they came, and at the conference, they became friends with many students, but one in particular, because I knew the family, an American boy, and he was, they were emailing after the conference, and that was when there was the strike on Gaza 6 years ago, and they were emailing each other every day. Are you okay? Is your family okay? What's it like there? It wasn't about politics. It was about my friend. And I think when I think about peace and I think about the words of the Dalai Lama, it's only if we establish empathy and a common understanding of how we're more alike than different, is there any chance for world peace? So in a roundabout way, I would say that when students are able to engage in the work of Montessori Model UN, to develop the facts and the science behind problems and understand the history, they can put it into a context, particularly when they have the chance to meet real people from those countries.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story, and it parallels a lot of the things that Montessori says about overcoming prejudice are in the context of very young children, and there's often this. I mean, it's not like she's being cynical. I don't think that that's the right read, but you could read it as like, look, it's really hard for adults to get over prejudice. Like, you got to start young, right? Like you got to kind of like get people of different nationalities and social classes. She was very, very concerned with differences between social classes, I think, just because that was a kind of stark difference in Europe. And children of different social classes will get along with one another. And then that's part of their soul in a way that it just is going to be hard for it to be part of the soul of adults. And that's kind of part of the process.
It's true. Children are so much more open. And when a kindness is shown to them and understanding, they respond.
Yeah, in this very natural and particular way, and what I like about the parallel that I saw in that anecdote is it's about the particular individual in front of you. There's something that's kind of, there's a natural and deep human connection, and things that you might think of as differences or that we talk about as differences in a certain kind of, I don't know, political sphere or cultural sphere, to children aren't that apparent. So you said, you talked both in your talk and you were just talking in the Q&A earlier about this idea of interdependence, and this is a kind of theme or pattern that comes up in I do a lot of Montessori training and Montessori theory training, and whenever I talk about independence, there are people who are like, well, what about other people, or what about interdependence? And whenever I talk about interdependence, people have the opposite question. And I mean, I think that there's often a kind of response, like a I don't know, an assumption of like, well, there's independence on the one hand and interdependence on the other hand, and those are the contrasts. So what is going on here? Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yes. Again, I think it's a developmental continuum, that in order to be able to feel this sense of solidarity with humanity, you have to develop your independence, your personhood. and to know that you are a competent, effective, 3-year-old or 5-year-old. And then as students develop at the elementary age and become social beings with great imagination and creativity, they really begin to form very strong friendships with one another in a small group. But the family is still important to them. In adolescence, as they're developing a greater sense of community and where the peer groups become even more important, they're beginning to see the interdependency, and they're really, at that point, ready to engage in civic participation. So they can see that the community, this small community of which they're part, is important, but there's an even bigger community that they can engage in and see the impact that they can have. So I think it's to summarize, it's a developmental continuum, and to become an interdependent person, to see the impact that you have and the involvement in solidarity, you have to have first been fully developed as an independent person.
Yeah, and maybe I could just ask the question in a more pointed way. What happens if you don't develop fully what happens if you kind of have an aborted first stage, where it's like you're in some sense dependent in some deep way on others, or you think that you are, or that's part of your kind of psychology or soul, as Montessori might put it, and then you're faced with questions of interdependence, like why do you need to kind of be independent first? Does that question make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, what I would say is that if it's a developmental process, and that if you skip one stage, you don't go forward, you stay stuck. When I think about some of the leaders that we've had on the world stage, you can't help but think they're stuck as a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. It's all about me. It's my country first. It's me. It's my needs. It's not about what's good for the majority of the people the majority of the time. And so I would say that, as psychologists have said, that narcissism is really a function of inadequate social emotional development.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. There's a certain kind of intuitive sense that it makes to me, and Montessori makes these kind of like elliptical comments, like, look, like mankind isn't an insect hive or a herd; it's like a collection of human beings that are interacting with one another, and it makes sense to me that people need to relate to one another from a position of like mutual security, and that there's a kind of independence that grounds that. Yeah, it's something to think more about, definitely. We just got a great question. Let me pull it up again. I don't know how much you have to say about this, but I'll just ask it. One of the challenges that's facing Montessori guides in their environment is working with differently abled children. So this gets at one of the potential dimensions of kind of equality or differences. Mainly just because I think the questioner is getting at the idea that this idea of inclusion, or how to be inclusive, is missing from the training of many teachers, and so they don't know what to do. And if you compare this to, like, especially how you describe Montessori's work in her early life, it was kind of the whole project, the entire Montessori project started from a position of tremendous inclusion of children of very, very different learning differences in classes. So how should Montessori guides approach this challenge?
Well, it's a huge question, of course. I think if you follow her principles, that finding out what interests a child, and being able to identify that passion that drives a child, what are they interested in? You can always find a place within a Montessori classroom. And I say this as having been a classroom teacher, but also in MMUN, we have 3-year age spans in every committee. So 9 to 12, 12 to 13 to 15, And these are children who come from all over the world, from Montessori backgrounds, non-Montessori, from every sort of flavor of education that's available. And they come together, and there is a way that they collaborate to find a solution in 48 hours or less to a global problem. And so how do you do that? Well, you have to, as we know, prepare the environment, create the freedom within limits, and give dignity to each child to understand that they have a voice and that their voice is powerful, and it's interesting to know what they have to say. So I don't have a quick checklist for how to include inclusion, except to say that it works. That it requires a tremendous commitment on the part of the guide, that you believe in the potential, the capacity of each child, and you find a way to tap into it, which can be very demanding, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, look, there are particular situations and particular classrooms and particular children where you really have to get into the details and be like, okay, like let's figure out what to do. And the kind of standard, what works for most children might not work in this case, and it requires out of the box thinking. But I've always felt like Montessori, like it's what you said, like the principles work. And it's not only do they work, it's a power tool. It's like you have an advantage if you kind of approach this from a Montessori perspective, and you observe and you think about the needs of the child, and you have this framework of how the child's needs are continuous with the rest of humanity, and you iterate and you kind of treat it like a scientist and a saint, that really plays out. So yeah, I agree with what you said, and I also agree that this is a complicated question, and these situations can be quite challenging. And like I'm always torn between being like, you have the superpower of Montessori, and like not wanting to be too cavalier about it, and be like, yeah, I know it's hard. I
think one thing we always have to remember, because it really comes back to the teacher, that while Montessori creates us in a role of facilitator and guide, it's such a key position, because through your observations, you really understand what that child's behavior is saying. That using the scientific approach of observation is only useful if, as a teacher, I've already examined myself. So I know that I'm not projecting in my observations something about me that I'm seeing in that child. And that's where I think that Montessori talks about the spiritual development of the teacher is so important, and why professional development is so important for teachers, to continuously have the opportunity to learn, to interact, network with other teachers, and have the support to continue to grow. And I think that during COVID, it's probably been harder for people to have professional development, but to realize that as a teacher, you're right, we have all the tools, we have these superpowers, but at the same time, we need support as well. We need some outreach.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's like a spiritual challenge to like, even if you just take a simple case of like, I don't know what to do with this child.
Yes.
But I want to believe in this child. That is a hard tension to hold, like emotionally and realistically, like if you feel incapable, and that's where you start to kind of project and externalize, and you kind of run the risks of kind of making it the child's issue, and making it worse. We have a couple more minutes left. I have another question that's a big one, so feel free to kind of treat it how you want. So Montessori, she talks a lot about nature, both in a kind of narrow sense of like trees and like get out into nature and work on a farm and understand nature, but also in a broader sense of like the world and the universe and kind of feeling in sync with the world. And all of this is part of her pedagogy. She also talks about supernature, which is it's like a little bit of a, I don't know if it's idiosyncratic to her, just a little bit of a historical term for civilization. And she thinks that industrial society, like this world that we've built together as human beings, is
Yes.
also something important for children to fall in love with and to interface with. All of it, including like machines and farms and economics and money. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I want to talk first about the positive side of that.
Yeah.
Because while she talked about supernature, and it was definitely a thought, a thinking current with her times, that that the evolution of machines and technology is what was going to bring about development for everyone, that it was the hope of mankind. And, you know, frankly, we know now that was a mistake, but it was current for her times. She also included with that the importance of gratitude, to recognize that all of these inventions that we take for granted every day have been built on the shoulders of people that we don't know. Let's talk about this technology that we're using right now. How amazing that we're connecting all over the world. And, you know, we're all in different time zones, but we're all plugged in together. So that opportunity to be consciously grateful for everything that you have been given in your station in life right now, I think is very important for people to recognize and make students aware of. But I do think she was mistaken about supernature as being above nature and that we were controlling nature. And we certainly know that today when we know about the fossil fuel industry having, you know, catapulted this climate crisis, and we don't seem to be able to get over our addiction to fossil fuels, which may be the undoing of our civilization. So I think that Montessori would have different words for today, but the time in which she lived were different than we are today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Judith, for the wonderful talk and the fascinating Q&A.
Thank you. It was fun to speak with you.
Yep, it's always a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.